Okay, here we have a Clow fire hydrant. This is called a cutaway. Clow is really great to provide this for us. Happens to be one of my favorite hydrants. You can look at it and see that it's pretty simple to work on, easy to work on. And I actually have a few people in this room right now that work on fire hydrants as part of their job, a small part of their job. In field operations, everybody gets a crack at just about everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
For the most part. And most of the crew is trained up on maintaining fire hydrants, rebuilding them, replacing them, and things like that. So we're gonna run through the main parts. In different utilities and different systems, they might have Clows, they might have WOTRs, they might have Muellers, they might have, there's a whole assortment, several different types of fire hydrants. Some of them have their own names for the different parts. And so if you're familiar with utilities, if you are working in a utility, you've worked on fire hydrants, we're gonna cover information that is more general knowledge and maybe useful in the higher grades. The fire hydrant lecture I gave the other day is gonna cover all the basic information you need for your exams. This is a little bit extra, and this is a hands-on video. So let's start with the operating nut. The operating nut is at the top, and on this one, we have this bolt inside, and what does that do?
Keeps the cap on.
It keeps the cap on, okay. And how do we get oil or grease into this, the oil into the?
You would have to take off the cap and the nut that's under it, and
And so what he's explaining is, we'll remove this top piece, right?
yeah,
The operating nut.
yeah,
Unscrew it, and you see this piece that's threaded right here into the hydrant body. This part lifts out, and in this chamber here, and in some fire hydrants they're called packing glands because some of them actually have packing. But that's where the oil, this is the oil reservoir where we keep the oil, right? And it's a food grade oil.
Like mineral
So
oil.
if it does get into the water, exactly, it's not gonna harm anybody. And it'll dissolve and dilute down so you won't even notice it. What do we call this?
bonnet.
The bonnet, very good. There's 4 bolts on the bonnet. So if we're gonna do preventive maintenance and if we have to, let's say, replace a gasket, or maybe we're doing an accident kit and we've gotta remove this a piece at a time to get down to the lower seat or the lower barrel. First thing we're gonna do is isolate the fire hydrant. There's gonna be an isolation valve just upstream of the fire hydrant. It's gonna be on a T that comes off the distribution main. And that's gonna be at least 6 inches in diameter or more if the hydrant is being used for firefighting purposes. If there's a fire hydrant on a main that's less than 4 inches in diameter, 4 inches or less, it's really only good for flushing the system, testing pressures, things like that. And we can do that with a blow off. We could do that with something else that's not as expensive as a fire hydrant. Because as you can see in the video, from the operating nut down to the shoe, this might be, well, this has a 5.5 foot bury, or 5.25. 5.25 feet, that's the bury. That means it needs to be buried up to about here. So that if this fire hydrant gets hit by a vehicle, it's designed to break here on this shaft here on this main stem. There's a coupling that can't be seen in the video right now, but it's designed to shear and break at that point. And that means that this car or a vehicle can hit this, knock it off, and we're not gonna get a geyser of water like we see in Hollywood movies, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so getting back, we have the operating nut. We can remove that, it unbolts. That's how we get oil inside this reservoir. Here we have a gasket. The gasket helps keep the water in between the bonnet and the valve body, or the barrel. This is the main barrel. We can also call it the valve body. Here we have the pumper cap, right? This is a 4.5 inch. Help me out.
5, it might be a 5 1/4, just depending on the style.
Oh, so,
But most of them are 4.5 typically.
okay, 4.5, then we have two others that are
Yeah,
here on the
two.
sides. Now, when this valve nut is closed all the way, how much water do we have in the barrel?
Normally it would fill up and then it would suck itself down through the weep holes, so it should be empty.
So it'll drain down, so,
Yeah.
so this, when this valve nut is closed,
There's
it's
no-
empty.
Yeah.
It's empty, so it's a dry barrel hydrant.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we're doing PMs, we're gonna isolate. We can keep this closed, we can exercise it. We can open this up, open the cap, remove this, fill this with oil, refill it, whatever needs to be done. We can put all that back together again. We can remove all these caps, grease the thread. Well, first we'll inspect them, make sure there's no debris in them, make sure they're not damaged. Make sure all the caps come off nice and easy. Once we're inspected and we clean them out a little bit, then we can take some grease, food grade grease, and grease all the threads, both on the hydrant body and inside the cap, and then replace them. Okay? And then you would, once you have everything secure, everything's battened down, then you can go back and you can pressure test it. You can exercise the valve nut even while it's closed.
Yeah.
You can, when the isolation valve is closed, you can exercise this after you grease, leave the oil, the lubricant on the inside in the oil reservoir. So we can exercise this back up and down, make sure it works properly. I mean, that's what we need, right? We need when the fire department shows up, or when we show up to flush or use that water for whatever reason, it's gotta work right. We gotta make sure it's working right. So these chains keep the caps right next to the hydrant. We're trying to avoid people from picking up and taking off with them. We don't wanna leave these open. We don't wanna leave them open to the elements. Here we have the barrel again, we're talking about the barrel. And we have a system of 8 bolts, 2, 4, 6, 8, yep, 8 bolts that hold it onto this connection here. Here we have the lower barrel. And as I was touching on earlier, if a vehicle hits this, it'll break right here. The coupling on the inside at the same, in the same area. To see it, you have to look inside that cutaway. It's designed to break, to shear off without releasing any water from the main. Down here, okay, so the lower barrel, we have the lower seat. These are the guides that help lower the seat down. If we have to remove the entire shaft, the entire stem, we have to remove the entire thing, we can, with the isolation valve closed. You can see all these different gaskets. There's gaskets in here, there's gaskets down here. Now, the thing about this fire, oh, and by the way, this is the chute.
Down at the very bottom.
Down to the very bottom, this is the 90, right? It's a 90 because water comes in this way. When we open the lower seat, when you open that stem, water fills this chamber, fills up the barrel, fills up this entire chamber. There's gonna be a little bit of air at the top. We pop open these lids and you have water gushing out. Now, one thing we can do is, like say a fire truck pulls up, you have firemen that's already right away opening up these caps. Now, they're opening up these caps, attaching their hoses just as they're getting ready to open this thing. Once they're attached and secured, then they open that main stem. So that water's not spraying out everywhere. You can't fight that force. It's important to note, especially on a dry barrel fire hydrant, that whenever this valve seat, lower seat, whenever it's not fully closed or fully open, we want it fully closed or fully open. We don't want it anywhere in between, because anywhere in between, what's happening is we have this weep hole baby around. And these are super heavy. But here, we have a weep hole. So when it's open fully, that weep hole closes up and it stops leaking out water. So think about where fire hydrants are found. Where do we put them? We put them behind curb, behind sidewalk, in the landscaping. So they're just right off the street. And we put them there because they need to be available to firefighters. So if water is coming out of this weep hole, pressurized at a high velocity, even though this is rather small, what's it gonna do to the landscaping, the sidewalk, the curb?
It's gonna undermine it. It's gonna start excavating.
It's gonna undermine it. And I've seen several videos, and no criticism to any other utility, but I've seen several videos on YouTube where the operator comes out, takes off one of the caps, puts his valve wrench or his hydrant wrench at the top, on the operating nut, and just opens it, starts to crack it open. He gets 1 turn, 1.5 turns, maybe 2 or 3 turns, and water starts coming out. So what is going on when that's happening? Water is jetting out of the weep hole, pressurized, and it's cutting away at the soil that's around it. And eventually it's gonna get under the sidewalk. It could get under the sidewalk, it could get under the asphalt, it could collapse.
Sinkhole.
It could cause a sinkhole, it could collapse the landscaping, and all this stuff. The more it does, the more expensive it gets to, for the remediation efforts, right? So. Let's just go ahead and show the back of this thing. So the employees, the operators that work in field operations, whether it's in my department or our FSR, our field service representatives, when they're out in the system, I tell them, hey, keep an eye out for fire hydrants that look like they have been knocked over. Looks like there's a problem. If there's a problem, take a picture of the back of it and text it to somebody on our crew with the location. We can look it up. We have a GIS system, a geographic information system. Almost forgot that. Which is an overlay over a satellite image that shows us where every fire hydrant is in the system. Unfortunately, a few fire hydrants out there in the system aren't on our GIS. When we find them, we have them added on. But this information will tell us who made it, and that way we can make sure that we have all the spare parts that we need to fix it. And that's something that we have to keep constantly on the ball, don't we?
Yes.
We have to constantly stay on the ball, maintain the inventory, especially post-COVID when lead times are so far out, and so many of these parts and pieces have become much more expensive, especially the brass. So, you guys have any questions? Any comments?
Those little pins on the side, is that what holds it in? On the pumper nozzle there.
The little pin,
These
it
right
holds,
here?
Yep.
it holds the brass piece in there so you can't, it won't spin out once you take the cap off.
That's just,
Yeah,
is that
so-
like a locking nut?
So it's a,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. So if you wanna take this piece out, this brass piece, you have to undo this one first.
Okay.
And now, one of the things to remember too, is that you want something at your vehicle, wherever you're getting your tools, something that'll hold these pieces that you take off and out. Cause you wanna keep them clean and you wanna keep them from being lost. You don't wanna lay them on your tailgate. Because if you do pick something up, you might knock it off, and then it's, you know, if it's winter time and it snows in your area, good luck finding that thing. If you're out next to landscaping and you're on top of gravel,
Good luck
That's
finding
gone.
it.
yeah, so you gotta be really careful. But you just imagine, you know, you remove that, now you have this big brass piece right here, especially this one. These things have gone up in price post-COVID, I think about 5 times what it used to be. You know, a lot of our brass is just incredibly more expensive and it takes longer to get them. I think some of these brass pieces, like angle stops, I think they're out 24 weeks right now.
24 weeks.
26 weeks.
So imagine a fire hydrant, if you lost that piece and you see a big gaping hole out of it, it's gonna be like that.
You didn't have a spare? Yeah. Yeah, not only if you lose this piece with the threaded piece, not only do you have a gaping hole, but you pretty much have to wrap it and isolate the whole thing. And a fire hydrant, if we know it's out of service, our goal is to have it back into service within 24 hours.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes we have the spare parts to do that, and sometimes we don't. So, George, you were gonna say something?
I was saying that, like, everybody wants to get those caps, and then they wanna put a hydrant key on it and crank them down as hard as they can.
And that's not really necessary, is it?
Actually, you're not even supposed to do it that way, because technically a fireman should be able to go up to that cap and turn it by hand and take it off.
Yep.
And if they can't, that's time that's taken away from them trying to either because it's frozen on there, or you know,
Limits
just
their
depending on different situations with it. You know, leaks make them tend to freeze, eats away at the gaskets, and you know, and then eventually if it starts to leak, it starts looking aesthetically bad.
Yep.
You know, so we try to keep them maintained as much as possible, and when we do service a fire hydrant, if it needs to be repainted, we will paint that fire hydrant.
Because
so
it looks good.
Yes.
Instead of, because water causes metal to rust.
Mhm.
And here in Arizona, we have to deal with the sun. So we have the UV rays that just beat down on the paint jobs of everything that we have that's out in the system and painted.
Oxidizes it.
It oxidizes, fades it. Water, even a little leak will cause rust stains on the sides. And after a while, it just looks terrible.
Yeah.
So when necessary, just like George was explaining, our fire hydrant, he's the facilitator of the program on the crew. So in my department, every operator facilitates a program, which means he's in charge of that program. He's responsible for training all the other operators. Why did I say it that way? He's my expert in that program. So we have a guy doing ARV maintenance. He's my ARV expert. He's trained everybody else on the crew how to inspect, PM, rebuild, replace an ARV. George is my crew's expert on fire hydrants. As the facilitator, he's responsible for ensuring that everybody on the crew becomes an expert, as he is, on fire hydrant maintenance. That includes inventory, that includes maintaining records. So when we get out, when George goes out with somebody else, because this is a 2-man job, just about every job in my crew is a 2-man job. We like to have that extra person there as backup.
Buddy system.
So when you show up to PM a hydrant, you're gonna have a checklist. It's gonna tell you, it's already gonna be pre-filled out to a point. It's gonna tell you the location, the asset number, the make and model, and you can take that paperwork, you can hit that fire hydrant and start going down the checklist. I checked this, I added lubricant, I greased threads. This is what the pressure is. So, and those records are very important. Everybody involved in the preventive maintenance of a fire hydrant, of an ARV, and these other programs, the records are so important that if you're not gonna write it down, if you're not gonna maintain the record, don't bother doing the work. The work doesn't matter anymore. We have to be able to show that we have to have a record that proves that we've been out there, we did these things. Those records are important for a lot of reasons. Most importantly, because it helps us understand if we're having a problem in a certain area with fire hydrants. But it also goes back to state regulations, county regulations, city regulations, or ordinances, all the way up to the EPA, federal regulations. Now, in Arizona, our primacy agency is the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. They want to know that at a minimum, we are touching every fire hydrant once every 5 years, 20% of the system. Ideally, we want to be out there, just as you'll see when you're taking a distribution exam, that we should be out there at least once a year, preventive maintenance, exercising the stem. That's ideal. And that would be a wonderful goal to have. I know of a utility, and I think it has 37,000 hydrants. There are 14 operators who work on the crew, and they have a director of fire hydrant maintenance. They have a director, they have a manager, they have a supervisor, they have a couple of foremen, and those foremen on down is like 14 people on that crew. That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of
And
hydrants.
they are able, because they have 37,000 hydrants, they have a crew of 14 people, and 5 days a week, that's their job, to get out there Monday through Friday. And any hydrants that have been reported damaged or out of service, otherwise out of service, they have that back into service within 24 hours.
Nice.
Can you imagine, one of those guys is the guy that keeps track of all the critical spare parts.
Oh.
That's a full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
The way they operate, and man, I envy them. Those guys must be just badass. Right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate your time. It's been a long day for my crew and wastewater treatment plant guy that's here with us. Thanks for coming here.
No worries.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it. I know it's been a long day, so appreciate all the hard work today, and thanks for being here for the video.
Thank you.